517 to scanner control. 517 to scanner control.
This is the Star Wars Squadrons podcast. It is February 14th. Happy Valentine's Day. I'm your host, Timebomb. With me every week is our other host for the show, Greenfox Leader. How you doing?
What's going on, man? How's it going?
Doing pretty good here. Just enjoying the long weekend here in Canada. It's Family Day weekend for us.
Nice. And Valentine's coming up here?
Yeah, that's right. Gonna celebrate that with my girl today. Making nice dinners. Got some gifts coming, all that jazz. Hope you're doing the same, man. There, Green Fox.
Oh, yeah.
We got a great guest. I've been waiting to get this guest on for so long. He's been making so many quality posts to Reddit all year, in the competitive Squadrons subreddit there. He's been innovating the game, giving all the hard details. He plays for Aces 5, one of the best pilots out there. Destracier, thank you so much for being on the podcast here, buddy.
Hello there.
So hyped to have you on, man. You have just so much information to give the community.
Yeah, man. Des, why don't you talk a bit about maybe when we first met back in early fall, right when the game first launched, and I think we even met in maybe 5-mans or somewhere like that, and we found out that you were the owner of our competitive Squadrons on Reddit and had done a bulk of the work around the point value testings for not only weapons but defense values and capital ship values, because there wasn't really any spreadsheets or anything floating around at the time, right at launch. No one really knew what any of the information was. Why don't you take us back to kind of early launch days and what that was like, seeing that there's a hole in the knowledge structure of the community and trying to fill that hole a bit.
Yeah, so this is that takes me back. So at the time we really didn't have anything at all, and so I really wanted to have a place that was entirely dedicated to only serious stuff, so that when people want to know something specific and something serious, they would know where to go. And that's the idea behind the creation of the competitive Squadrons. And we met. I think you contacted me right at the beginning, and so we were discussing about a lot of stuff, trying to create a way for people to join 5-mans and many of the other servers. And that was before we even had custom matches, so we had to post queues. That was really something.
Yeah, man.
Yeah, we made it work anyway. So that was really
spoke to the innovation of the community. What was your background before Squadrons, Destracier? What did you play? Other flight games? What was your background there?
I played ED, of course, a bit of War Thunder, and MMORPG, and most of my time was spent on fighting games, especially Melee, Super Smash Melee.
Yeah, and you also, I don't know if it's rare or not. I don't know how many people are, but you use a mouse and keyboard to play, right? You've never used a flight stick at all?
Oh yeah, I've used it a lot.
Okay.
So in the early games, so if we stick for Star Wars and EG maybe also, I was using a stick, but I moved away from my house, and I sold my equipment because I really didn't have that much space, and now I have to be serious. So I don't really have too much time and money to spend on expensive equipment. So right now I'm using a mouse and keyboard that are $20 pack for mouse and keyboard. So that's what I'm working with.
But I feel like the mouse and keyboard must have some advantage. What do you think gives you any advantage, the mouse and keyboard?
Um, I don't know about that, but for sure, controllers, because how the game refuses to let people with controllers change in-auth settings,
Yeah.
that is for sure a disadvantage for them.
Mm-hmm.
But that's something I think can very well be compensated by just pure talent. But yeah, at the highest level, if you're using controller, uh, at least for you want to make quick runs. You don't want to be but you cannot really manage power management and shield
Yeah.
front or
Yeah.
back or whatever very
I'm
well in
on.
controllers, and so
Mhm.
you need to be very fast and then go away. Otherwise, you
Yeah.
cannot really sustain the front lines.
It's exactly my situation on console controller. I mean, anyone who's played with me has probably heard me talk about it, but that's the situation I'm in, and I mean, I try to really adapt to it. I feel like I've done a pretty good job on console controller, and I can compete and be a contributing member of my team, but inherently, I do know that I'm at a disadvantage because of that. Now, why don't you? I mean, that's something you've talked about a lot. Why don't you discuss the advantage that advanced power management has over basic?
Yeah, so we have a lot of things that looks complicated about power management because we have the possibility to change and add pips one by one to attribute them wherever we want. But actually, because how the game works, it's not interesting at all because the only thing that is interesting is to maximize your overall energy, and to do that, the only way to overcharge your weapons is by putting full pips into
Mhm.
that specific power, and so
Yeah.
you really cannot. There really isn't that much complicated. So okay, so now I'm moving, so
Mhm.
I charge boost to the maximum. Okay, so now I want to regenerate my shield, so I have to to get full shield, and so you're basically shifting a lot of stuff around, but that doesn't really mean much. We could have a setting that would be like 1, 2, 3 in terms of
Mhm.
pips,
Mhm.
and that would be exactly the same.
Exactly, like the way
Actually,
the
so
throttle works, that would be better. That's actually how it should.
also yeah.
That's how it should work with the pips. See, this is the problem. I think they don't. I don't think they foresaw the way that we would be using power management, so they couldn't anticipate that. So the way it works on console controllers, that the pips are locked by tapping, so you can't really change the bind to anything with like double tap. So you have to hold, and then that hold time is basically the same as or it just takes away too much time. So you may as well be using basic power management, is what we've seen. But what you're suggesting, having like a step system almost, that would be ideal, right? So like rather than having to be like individual pips on the controller, if you were just like, I don't know, what would it be, like a third, half, full, or something, like some sort of variations like that, or something, right? Like 3 steps for it would help me out. I don't know.
Yeah, especially since in the math for the power management, it really doesn't matter to control pips individually. So
Right.
you really wouldn't be losing like anything at all.
No, because you're
So
just basically managing between like full and half between 2 systems, from what I understand. I haven't used it. Is that correct, or you should probably clarify that? That's probably easier.
always, yes, that is the most efficient way to generate power. So, for
Mhm.
example, I'm moving around and now I'm dialing in and trying to shoot on someone, so I
Mhm.
get full power. So I switch my pips back to engine, and right after that, I switch everything full to weapons, and
Yeah.
so this will. In the end, result in me having full power entirely 8 pips to weapons
Mhm.
and the rest into engines, and I go mid throttle. So this will give me the most firepower, um, and I can still be as maneuverable as possible. So yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, when the drifting was around, it actually was really good. I noticed that as soon as they did the dead drift fix, I was like, oh wow. I was like, I gotta learn some new evasion techniques now again, like, because I was really relying on that for survivability. And I mean, I still use it to help me maintain my boost as much as I can. But yeah, I can tell that it's sort of a factor. Okay, I kind of went off there on that whole that whole aspect of, because it
Let's
affected me.
let's
I
back it up
didn't
a bit.
personally see much difference after
Yeah.
that. So
I think I think while we're on talks of movements, and before we even talk about drifting or dead drifting, let's back it out to your first experiments, Des, with the flight engine of the game, and when you first kind of found that that there was something beyond just chaining the boost together, micro drifting as we called it back before launch. That there was something just a bit above and beyond the actual just micro boosting that we were seeing right there, right at launch. Because in case people are at home, they're listening, don't know, Des here is the first person that came up with the dead drift itself. And so why don't you talk a bit about kind of the evolution of the dead drift and when you started kind of messing around with some of those movement mechanics?
Mhm. So at the beginning, actually, I was working very hard to make a guide. It's still like 20 pages long about the different maneuvers that you can do, and it did not involve any kind of drift mechanical boost activation or whatever. It was just about, okay, so you have someone on your 6 and an enemy potentially on your right or left, so on your 3 or 6, and I mean on your 3 or 9.
Mm-hmm.
And what can you do in that specific case? And you have a set of maneuvers that you can compute mathematically to know what would be the best maneuver that you could possibly do to try and avoid as much damage from the people from the back and the guy on the right or left. So you have a lot of different stuff that you can do, and also many mind games in terms of, okay, so you start a loop, so the guy is expecting you to finish the loop, but no, you're going to change and shift to a different maneuver and stuff like that. But in the end, it turned out that so in this game we don't have a lead indicator, and instead of that it is hidden, but we have a very strong aim assist to try to force the shots to get to that lead, that invisible lead. And so the aim assist is actually so strong that any maneuvers that you could do is basically almost meaningless unless you're very, very small ships. So that's why, for example, the A-wing is being talked about so much because when you have a small hitbox, the slightest change in your speed in terms of absolute value or in terms of direction will allow you to dodge incoming fire. But if you're just a tiny bit larger, like a TIE fighter, or of course a Y-wing, most of the shots will still land onto you. Even if we were to change the stats of all the ships, so if we were to take all the ships and give them the same stats as the TIE Defender or A-Wing in terms of engine, acceleration, speed, and whatever, you would still see that bombers would be extremely unreliable because there is no maneuver that you can do to really shake off your opponent. And so in the end,
this is the
it turned
hitbox
out
basically.
that
The size. You're saying the size, so that relates to the hitbox. Is basically. Would that be true?
yeah, so basically, even if you have a strong engine, so you compare, so imagine a case where the Y-Wing had the same data for the engine of the Y-Wing, then you could do the exact same maneuvers, and so the A-Wing could dodge away by making shots of the enemy miss by, I don't know, 2 meters, maybe 1, and so this would work for him, but not for the Y-Wing because the shot will still land because of the huge hitbox.
Could they do a uniform hitbox for all ships? Is something like that possible? I mean, obviously it's possible. Do they ever do anything like that?
Could do it, but it wouldn't look very, very good. Most likely, it shouldn't be too much of an issue. But it is something that is entirely possible.
So
because we already have something that is horrible to see, like when you shoot at someone, and because you have lag, you have hit reg, and you see them taking damage, but you don't see it registered because their hull just doesn't change in terms of health. And so we already have something very annoying, so that shouldn't change so much.
So then this just makes me think, what do you, with the A-Wing nerf that just happened this week with dropping the shields by 100, what do you think about that?
I think there's an issue in terms of balancing the game. You cannot balance the game for everyone at the same time, in the sense that I see where they're coming from, because they collect the data from all the games, but not especially from the high level competitive games. And so they are trying to the two two things are incompatible. People having a hard day at work, come back home and want to have a fun party game with explosions and random upsets about them. Where on the other hand, you have people with a competitive mindset
Right.
who actually get off on playing against equally matched opponents.
Right.
To us, the journey is to improve. This is the fun.
Yeah.
So you have two incompatible things: casual gameplay with low efforts required, and smashing seals endlessly, feeling good about yourself doing that. And you have the competitive gameplay, where the effort is the fun. So this is. Yeah, and so they are trying to appeal to most of the issues that the majority of people have. So the aiming is hard to hit.
Yeah, that
but
kind of
that's really
that baffled me when I found out reading through that on that the New Republic. Just seeing the comments, I'm like, oh wow, the New Republic wins most of the time at the mid level. I was like, they're like, oh yeah, I don't feel like this blew my mind.
Well, it's we also always have to remember that it's asymmetric matchups, right? These are fictional ships that were made in a sci-fi universe, so it's not like even Russian versus American weapons or whatever. These are completely made from movies that got translated into competitive flight sim game, and they're not apples versus apples, right? So maybe the entire fleet of the Imperial was put together with all of their different capabilities versus the entire Rebel fleet Imperial put together with all of their capabilities are pretty balanced, right? But I don't think the interceptors versus the other interceptors were ever supposed to be complete head-to-heads, or the bombers going against the other bombers were supposed to be exact one-to-ones necessarily, because they were never meant to be like that.
They did the interesting things to balance it with the shields versus weapons engines kind of shunting. I thought that was cool. I think that's fair.
Did you talk? I had to go grab a kid for a second, but did you talk at all about the early days of dead drifting when it was predominantly in bombers, right? And because you were thinking that at the time, the thought was that the heavier the ship was, the longer of a dead drift you can get to be able to do more damage on the cap ships as you're flying by and stuff. What was going on there in your thought process? Because you weren't drifting in. You weren't doing a lot of dead drifts with like interceptors or anything, right? It was mainly bombers.
Oh, actually, I was doing that. So so I was doing basically from the first month. I was doing basically what you see in the first Fencast video, where you just do a dead drift sideways, and you start shooting at the enemy, and you shift your power to your engines and do all sorts of brakes to ensure that even if the enemy manages to quickly find your lead and shoot correctly, you can still just mess up with their aim by stopping right away and then restarting back up or stuff like that. And so I should have made some few videos about that, but basically you can do that with all the ships. It's just that shunting is more or less interesting-ish in some cases when you do that.
What do you mean by that?
What I mean by that is that you don't really have that much control, because shunting doesn't have a good lag compensation, and so if you play a custom match against a team where you have even just one dude who is over the pond, you are most likely not going to be able to shunt properly at the right time, and so this is just going to get you killed most of the time when you're flying against good people. So this is an imbalance that is still here because of how lag works, but there isn't much we can do about that. To fully answer your question, so I was also, for example, using the TIE Interceptor. The TIE Interceptor and Blastburst, and doing the exact same thing. So blastbursting around the whole of the frigates and the flagship. And I think for the last days of where we were, AC5 was fighting Deathwatch. This is what I was actually doing. So I was just because the TIE Bomber was really, at the time, they started to nerf its HB. And so you basically had a ship that was very easy to hit, didn't have that much speed to get to its objective, and yet didn't do that much more damage to compensate, to make it worth the run.
And
so at the end,
boost extension,
I always, there was no boost extension, and also when when you are at higher level, you really see that you cannot have that notion of you need to protect your bombers and whatever, but you cannot really do that. A good bomber is a bomber that can just survive on its own and try to apply as much damage as possible. And so in the end, my best bomber was like a time interceptor, because you could actually just move away very fast and get a lead in terms of speed, and get there very fast, apply damage, run away, and then use mask or whatever. And especially the full control, the speed really, when you don't lag out, you really have a control that allow you to just run past the enemy hole and always keep you hidden from the enemy. And so there was this very nice synergy that I had that was very, very interesting at the time. So you could always also, if you saw that your friends were trying to make a run, so so you are alone on the on the battlefield. Enemies were trying to chase you, and so you couldn't really apply much damage. You were just busy trying to get away from the incoming fire. As soon as you would see that your friends are coming back, then you would sacrifice yourself, and I would simply run away very far away from the flagship, try to draw their attention to me so they would kill me, and let my 4 teammates destroy the flagship completely. Because so it's a team-based game at the end. So.
Yeah, I mean, that's something you see players get overextended at those lower levels and earlier in the game, too. Just desperate for kills. I mean, it was a much more PvP, dogfighting kind of fleet battles earlier, too, before... I mean, I really think it changed less dogfighting-ish by December there. The other thing, Destracier, that you've done throughout is you've been doing a lot of the breakdowns on the numbers of the flagships, how much health certain subsystems have, a lot of stuff on passive damage. How have you been going about figuring this out both before and since private matches?
So yeah, I think 2 months after the launch of the game, I managed to really be able to read the game code properly. And so then it was just about trying to figure out, so I'm looking for this kind of like concept. And so now I need to ensure that I didn't overlook anything, so I try to look a bit more, but I'm not very, very good at doing that sort of thing specifically, so it takes a lot of time. And so I end up trying to verify what I see in the game code with actual testing in game, and that's where you actually run into issues, because the game code may be made in such a way that it is clear, but some subtleties in how the game runs can completely screw everything. So
can you give an example of that?
So you had a lot of stats that actually don't apply properly, because like compensation doesn't apply very well, and so everything that is time sensitive. So what can I say? So for example, you have some sort of like a weird pathfinder for the corvettes. So that's why you can sometimes see them just, when they destroy frigates, you can see them just run around in circles for like 2 minutes before they actually get to the enemy flagship. You can also see the frigates actually phase through objects and walls and whatever. And so what happens is that you're supposed to have a passive damage, so to speak, that applies from the corvette to the frigate, and if the pathfinder doesn't find a good path, so to speak, then the damage will be applied even if the corvette just is at like, I don't know, 6,000 just like all the way around the map. So you have weird stuff like that. You have passive damage applying not properly for the first 30 seconds, and it gets reset as soon as the corvette gets close, and it starts applying damage as well. And so you have weird stuff like that. And so recently we had a targeting beacon thing. So there are also a lot of undocumented changes. I don't know if that is because it is unintended changes or not, but it is very weird.
So what's the what's with what we're saying with the beacons?
Targeting system. So targeting system. So there was always that thing about targeting system that changes how the background passive damage applies. So more like the imaginary damage your flagship applies to the enemy frigates and the enemy corvettes when they get close to your flagship.
Right.
And destroying the power system or disabling it will change that value. And so even if in the game code you see certain specific values, in actual games you can sometimes end up with targeting system being destroyed actually doesn't change anything, and sometimes it completely removes totally passive damage, at least from the flagships. So you have some weird inconsistencies, and it's hard to know if it's just some random quirks
Right.
that appears from time to time, or if it's actually just an undocumented changes that they just applied for some reason. And so yeah, it's but that's okay. The game is really not that complex, so these things will get figured out. So, and now the combative right squadron is actually big enough that I have people telling me, yeah, actually I've seen this thing happen in games, so that cannot be true all the time. So okay, so let's try to figure this out. So we know exactly, we can pinpoint the issue and try to address it as fast as possible. But in the end, the answer itself might not be very satisfying nor very conclusive, because at the end of the day, the game is still very, very buggy. Let's be real, because devs talked about a lot about balancing, but they acknowledge the existence of Cal Cup and other competitions. And yet they don't address the fact that in those competitions we actually have rules like, no turrets at all. So basically, a quarter of the toolset of the support ship is unusable. You have the torpedoes not applying damage properly because of how the splash damage applies.
Are turrets banned in Cal Cup completely?
Only in STL, I believe. And Cal Cup, it's okay.
Yeah, Cal Cup, they're technically allowed.
But in Cal Cup and STL, for example, you're not allowed to attack the flagship off phase. And so it's an additional rule that we've made into it. And they didn't at all address the idea that, okay, so guys, are you okay with this? Are you not okay with this? Do you plan on correcting the issue by changing how damage applies or anything? And we basically have no answer, even though it's actually... we've made an entire role to try to change the game, how it's played in a competition. So that's where they didn't address that.
There's just no way they foresaw us playing the game the way we do. You know what I mean? Like, they didn't imagine that it would be like, okay, you have, a support ship, 2 AI farmers, and 2 interceptors off the start is like with mass and beacons on the support ship, and no one saw that as a, you know what I mean? I'm sure they didn't imagine that would be the meta strategy at 3, 4, 5 months into the game now, right? Like to win the opening like that. So the game does develop so far outside of what they're thinking, and I think that has to do with a lot of the power management.
A lot of stuff in their testing. They actually saw that many people, instead of using boost and drift in a conventional way, at the very beginning, in their testing they actually saw people doing basically what looked like retro drifting. So they would charge more boost and then just boom, 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 just drift around like 90 degrees angle. And so that's interesting, because after they saw that, they still left it in the game. So that means they were okay with it, or maybe it was too much of a hassle to try to change. But in any case, it was already taken into account. And so basically, the work we've done after that, so trying to add specifics on those strategies, have just been there to just enhance the efficiency. So you have micro drifting, you have retro drifting or whatever, and so basically, pinballing and the brakes and whatever you can see as the guides on the competitive squadrons are basically just an expansion pack for the basic tools we have in the game. So
I mean, it's one of the things I'm doing constantly when I do go and play with like new players. It's like you've got to go to competitive squadrons and read these guides to understand these different techniques, basically, because it will open up so much more for you in the game. And I mean, there's some people who've been playing since launch who don't even realize like what's available to them. So I mean, I hope we can kind of get that information out to them more. Trying our best to put it out there. I mean, you're doing a great job putting out there, Destracier, and that's what I like. You've never been someone who's like, in some games people would have this information and just like totally keep it to themselves, but you're so open and putting it out there. You want to help the whole community get better, man. That's so appreciated.
Yeah, there are still something I'm not open about it because I don't know how the community feels about it. So that's an issue that is maybe different, but that's still something that can happen. Is that okay? So this thing is possible, but how do people feel about it? Because so yeah, that's something that is very very weird. So before the piercing torpedoes or whatever, you could always try to guess the firing patterns of the frigates and flagship to try and attack them off phase.
Right.
It would take you, if you were alone, like forever to bring their shields down using simple iron cannons and whatever. But that's what
Yeah.
you had at the time, and that's what I was doing. And so if someone was trying to prevent me from doing that, then I would most likely die instantly, or I would be chased away because it's impossible to to predict the firing patterns of the flagship and at the same time try to survive against someone while still applying damage. But you have this kind of like high risk, high reward thing, so that's kind of like more okay-ish in terms of what the devs thought about the game. So as it's been said, I think on Twitter, is that they've allowed it to be possible to phase things. It's just meant to be extremely hard, and it is. But the issue that Piercing Torpedo introduced is that now you don't have to be flying around and knowing the firing patterns of the flagship or the frigates to dodge away and try to apply damage. Now, basically, anyone can just sneak around, launch a torpedo in and out, and you're done. You don't need that much practice in the game to be able to pull that out. And
So
so
you think it
that
lowered the
lowering of the
skill
skill gap,
ceiling? Yeah.
yeah, that lowering of the skill gap by using a more efficient weapon, so to speak, might be something that puts the issue over the edge. So before the piercing torpedo, it was uh, unless you're extremely good, it would be basically like suicide, and especially it would be very hard on your team. It's a risk reward thing, so it's something very hard. And with the piercing torpedo now, with no skills at all, basically you could just do so much damage and everything.
But is it something? That's
Though
not
in the
something
end,
I feel like
it
you're
is
seeing
symmetrical.
that
So
often, though. Like, do you think you're seeing that often? People doing these little, piercing torpedo runs on the cap ship before the shields are down.
um, not anymore, no, because people are more right now are training for the competitions, and in the competitions, it is forbidden. So you always want to try to train on
Yeah, of
techniques and
course.
strategies that work for your competition. So we are biased here, but before it was made clear that it was forbidden, you had a lot of people trying this
Right.
out, and
Yeah.
so I think at first, so I was actually with Randall Logans showing them how you could out of phase just without using piercing torpedoes. And then they was asking, is it possible to use the piercing torpedoes to increase your efficiency? So instead of like spending 2 minutes to try to bring it down, do be more effective. And yes, it turned out that yes, it is
Yes.
very effective. So and so basically from there you had a huge spikes in games where people were trying to do that. And so I had to try, because I cannot, even if that really doesn't personally suits me very well, I don't personally enjoy it, I still need to be like kind of like neutral for the competitive scene. And so basically, yeah, play to win, I respect that. So I needed to kind of like investigate more if really my tactics could be enhanced, or if maybe actually my tactic was completely meaningless, because you don't even need to know any kind of firing pattern or anything. You just need to just sneak away at 1,04999 meters and lock on your torpedo and then run away. So so I needed to try that on a few games to ensure that is it really as easy or as hard as people are saying, and
Yeah.
is the easiness to do it, so to speak, is it really going against their idea that if you go out of phasing stuff, it is meant to be really hard. And yes, it is still extremely hard. It's just that you need to see that against an equally matched team in terms of skills. If the team is already like just baby cells, you could club them by just killing them, or you could just out of phase them and spare their lives, but destroy their flagship in like 7 minutes or so.
Oh my god, that would be crazy to see
but
a flagship go down before you took out frigates or something. I guess that would be funny to see the game get to that point. I'm also curious, actually.
Yeah,
Right.
I think I've only done that like twice. I think.
Oh, you've done
and
that?
it's a
That's
decent deal.
hilarious. I need video on that one.
Mm.
The thing I was going to ask actually about when it comes to out of phasing, right now that is such a huge part of the competitive scene. Like most games come down to a team, out of phasing it pretty much to make sure the other team can't get it. Like putting up a last defense is too risky almost. You almost like I saw, even if 27, first of all, what do you think's the highest that a team can out of phase a ship? And what do you think is the best strategy for out of phasing right now in the game?
There is nothing like you can always apply damage. It's just some sort of like psychological stuff. Like if I can get there and finish the flagship, which is at 15%, and bring it down to 0 and kill it, that time it took me to destroy those 15%, then I could have also just spent twice as much time to bring it from 30% to 0 as well. So it's not really something. Yeah, it's more about how you feel about it. It's more about the feeling. And so, yeah, but in the end, it's still something very hard to do and very inefficient compared to other tactics. So it's always more of a mind game. So that is a bet that you need to take, and it is So you can totally out of phase like from frigates and flagship from 100% shield to down to 0 hull. The only issue is how easy can you do that, and how much the enemy are skilled enough to be able to prevent you from doing that without wasting their time. So that is always
I mean, I hate being in that situation where we've just got the flip. We're about to go on defense or offense. We're on offense now, and we feel like we're about to win it, but the team's out of phasing you, and you're like, no, it was at 25. How did they get it? And it's like, especially if like I've made that call before where I've said, don't out of phase it, guys. We're going to put up a hard defense here and get the flip, and then we'll just finish it off. And that was the wrong call to make. Is that just something that what do you think? Should you always go for the out of phase? What do you think in that situation?
That entirely depends on the skills of your teammates and how your team can be synchronized.
Yeah.
So, because you always need to have a strategy that is adapted to the skills of your teammates, and that is very important. Because even if you have the best strategy in the world, if you cannot perform it, if you cannot apply that strategy because of a lack of skill or training time, then it doesn't really matter too much. So maybe to answer more of your question directly, so what you would not want to do actually is destroy the power system, because so as soon as you shoot somewhere, you on the whole section, you have a chance of popping out on spawning
the weak points,
a breach.
Yeah,
Weak point. And so if you already know where they are supposed to appear, you can actually shoot at the place where they're supposed to appear, apply a bit of damage, and most likely by the time you yourself realize that the breach has appeared thanks to your damage, the last couple of shots you sent before you realize that will actually destroy the weak points right away. So that's why actually knowing the specific layout of where the whole section ends, where it begins, and where the bridge point associated with that whole section can be very important. And those bridges will still appear anyway, thanks through passive damage or through any kind of random damage doing by any kind of other player. And so destroying the power system won't do very much.
Right. So you have 5 total, is that correct? Breach points that will spawn weak points on the breach.
Yeah, and no more. No more.
So if you've got, so you're saying if you take out, say you get 2 created from passive damage, then when you kill the power, it'll only create 3 more. It'll create the difference of the 5 remaining.
Exactly. Yeah. And they might spawn at a point, on a whole section that is actually hard to reach, so it's not actually very convenient.
You're right.
You would rather want to shoot at some place and ensure that it is very likely that the breach point will appear there.
Right.
Because, for example, if you're trying to out of phase the enemy flagship and the only breach that appears is like right in the middle below, good luck trying to get that without dying. So
yeah, especially if the tractor's still there. Yeah.
Des, do you think?
Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, do you think, we've stayed up till 6, 7 in the morning sometimes talking about the intent behind stuff, especially when you're talking about the intent behind rule sets, the intent behind what the developers had in mind for certain things. And like you said, obviously the devs left in out of phase cap ship damage for a reason. They could have easily done any number of things to really solidify those phases as being like, oh yeah, you're on offense or you're on defense, and but obviously they left all that damage potential in there. And the story of Star Wars is the famous last stand, the Hail Mary for that engine core at the center of the Star Destroyer. You know what I mean, or the Death Star. So it's like. What's your opinion about out of phasing in general? Do you think it's just a part of the game and everybody needs to just kind of, nut up and learn how to play defense? And or do you think it really is a question of does everyone really want to dedicate a goalie to just watching the cap ship the whole time for out of phasers?
That's a very, very tough question in the sense that so we've been trying very hard to try to make the intent of the Calibration Cup rule set in trying to see exactly what should really reflect most the idea the devs had. And so we've been trying very hard to see what we could accept or what would not be acceptable in a competitive environment. And also we're trying to balance the fun the competitive players have with the fun of the spectators watching us. And so that is very, very hard to balance because some of the stuff that might interest spectators is obviously not very interesting for competitors. So most spectators would just want to see upsets like at every turns, and obviously this is the bane of competitive players. We want to be having as much less as least the least amount of luck possible in the game, so that we have we can really say it's hard to really gauge who's the best player when you keep getting killed by random NPCs or or whatever. So it's a balance always. And so the out of phasing is like I agree with many of the statements that have been made when I was talking with people about it, in the sense that it actually makes the game more interesting, because instead of being like purely linear, instead okay now defend, okay now attack,
Exactly.
the game is more about attack and defense at the same time, and it's more of a risk reward thing, and that is interesting to watch.
I agree. It's more. A flight sim game is like a 3-dimensional battlefield, and you're right. The strategy also has to be 3-dimensional because it's not just offense or defense. It's that perspective you have to have. I love that. That's true. Another thing,
because otherwise it would be very boring very quickly. You would see, okay, let's do the offense phase. We brought the figures down to 30%. Now it's their turn. They brought it down to 19% or whatever. And so it's kind of like not very. It's kind of like more who's doing the best attack, and it's much less interesting to watch because you know what's going to happen.
Right.
There is not that much risk being taken. There's not that much mind game because it's just attack and defend. And so that's where actually the being able to have a phase stuff is actually interesting in terms of mind games. But now the question would be how exactly. So we agree with the idea, but now exactly how much is it okay? So in the sense of what tools are you allowed to use, and what tactics are you allowed to use to bypass that idea of tug of war and only attack or defense. And so so for Calibration Cup we made that difference that so out of phasing frigates is okay, out of phasing flagship to flagship is okay, but if the frigates are already up and full shields and totally unscathed, you are not allowed to go for the flagship. So it's kind of like a middle ground between the two. So you're allowed to out of phase, but not too much. Though the main issue that people had that made us more or less do that in the end is that we were worried that we would see basically the game being not as interesting, because we were fearing that basically the entire enemy team would basically just ignore each other and go straight for the flagship.
Right.
And so that's what we feared. But in the end, it's not competitively super viable to just go for the flagship
No.
right away, and it's so risky that the skill set would basically only allow the 4 or 5 best team that we have to be able to do that.
Yeah.
Because otherwise you would just simply die because of you need some tremendous mechanical skills just to be able to survive there
Yeah.
and consistently apply damage, so you're not useless. And so that's already very hard. So, and there are many strategies that you can use to mitigate that and whatever. And in the end, it actually takes longer to do it than to just go straight through
Right.
the specific layers that you already have because of passive damage, and also how much easier it is to apply damage when you're not getting, I mean, instantly reduced to atoms by
And I
a
think
single shot of it.
that's
Sure.
a big thing in the solo queue. Players don't realize how much passive damage can do the work for you, I think, and that's, you see just people die so much just doing nothing, and I think that's why it can be a frustrating experience for a lot of people too. And there's no way really for them to understand that either, just because I don't think the game really teaches you that. It takes people like Destracier kind of like putting it out there for them to learn. Another thing I kind of want to get into here, Destracier, that I think you're a good person to speak to about this is, lately, a big issue, Radiant just put out a video discussing macros. There was another player who only did dogfights as New Republic in VR who did a little bit of a video about macros. It's another thing where, the community has been worried about this. So what do you think? Could you talk about the difference between bindings and macroing and where you think the line is there of where it becomes not fair play?
There is a lot of stuff that comes back to your first question about hardware, so controllers and keyboard.
Uh-huh.
So, for example, to be more efficient, so for example, I've made my setup so that it specifically does stuff in such a way that, so I bound, for example, so I don't know if you have a keyboard in front of you right
I do.
now, but
Mhm.
you can see that you have the space bar, and right above it you have C, V, B, N, and the other keys.
Mhm.
You have X and Alt, and you have all of those keys that you can actually just press all together by just simply pressing your thumb the right way, and you can activate them all at once by just using your thumb the right way. So that's what I'm using. For example, so there is in terms of, if you have, the more control you have over how you can keybind stuff, and the more versatile your hardware is, because obviously you wouldn't be able to do that with your controller,
Right.
unless maybe you were to kind of like, maybe, I don't know, print some sort of like 3D print some sort of like weird stuff, so that's
Yeah.
weird button
Yeah,
key, that when you press it, it actually presses the two
Mhm.
below, so X and Y or whatever. You could do that, I guess,
Yeah.
but you wouldn't have that much control, because right now, so for example, I can just use my thumb and activate shield first and then activate boost, or I can boost and then activate shields, all of it by just a single press of my thumb. And so it's still, though, I think, less efficient than those macros that I've been shown in the video that he's made, because when I check my keylog, because that's why I do to train everything. So you need to train to be able to see exactly what suits you best in terms of reactiveness and how you can more efficiently execute the flight patterns and how you want to move exactly. And when something wrong happens, it's not enough to have a recording of what happens in the game, because also the instruments in the game are actually laggy, and so they have a huge lag time, and so they're really not reliable. So what I use personally since the beginning, I've been using, so I record my games, and every time I do something wrong or whatever, I save it to a specific place, and I check the keylog to know exactly what I did. So, okay, so I messed that up because I actually activated shield first and only then boost or whatever. So I know what I did wrong, and then I know what I need to train exactly to be able to not make that mistake. But even so, it still takes me, like, even with my thumb and just one activation, you still see a lot of variation, and sometimes it can take me, like, I don't know, between 200 and 300 milliseconds to do something, whereas with the macro, I guess basically they do it between like 0 milliseconds. So it's more efficient. But as I will say, when people get worried about, oh, I'm not good about dead drifting or whatever, they are good actually. It's just that you just need a better keybinds, you just need to put more thought into it and just practice it a lot, because in the end it doesn't really matter that much if you're, I mean, the acceleration curves for drifting are actually very generous, in the sense that even if you empty your engine power, like, I don't know, half a second after you activated drift, it's still going to be a good and decent dead drift. So it's not that bad at all. So you don't need that thing to make you perfect, because you don't need perfection in this game to be decent. It's more important to know exactly where you should drift and the right direction you should take to try to get out of sight of your pursuer while still trying to attack the flagship or the frigate or whatever. This is immensely more important than being able to do a perfectly dead drift every single time or whatever.
Yeah, because it seems if it's programmed to do it a certain way, it doesn't allow for the variance you might need in game. Like, you know what I mean, when you're just like, I have to dead drift this way to avoid him. Totally. You know, that's what I feel like. People have said maybe you could get to that point. I don't know. I find it hard to believe. Like, when people, 5 players who've been playing this game since the start who have that ability without macroing to make those fine adjustments, I feel like they will be at the advantage. It's just, I feel bad for maybe mid-level players who have to deal with that, and new players are probably gonna have a bad time.
Yeah, like I said, in my opinion, man, it's F1 drivers driving with automatic transmissions.
Right.
It's just not going to happen at the highest level. The top end teams, like, why would you want to pigeonhole yourself to being locked into this exact angle, turn, length of time for drift? Any of those. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, Des, but any one of those variables, if you locked them into stone, into concrete, you'd be at a disadvantage at the highest level, right? Am I wrong or what?
Mm-hmm.
Like, if they were locked into concrete, any one of those variables, whether it's time, speed, length of drift, angle of drift, direction, anything, if you were locked into doing that every single time, you'd be like, half the time you'd be like, oh shit, I missed again, because I'm a robot out here when everyone else is a ballerina, right? I don't know, maybe I'm wrong on that.
Yeah, I think you're right. Des, what do you think?
Yeah, so when you have people complaining about that kind of stuff, if you recognize this from yourself, that you're losing to the same thing over and over, very, very rarely is the tactic so broken to the point that where it's impossible to play around. So the best thing to do in these types of scenarios is, if you're losing to the same type of thing over and over again, is trying to figure out solutions, not just mindlessly keep playing. If you have an issue, whether it's like, in any game, any sport, whatever, it is to find the solution rather than keep, rushing the same thing, keep losing the same way. It doesn't matter if you lose the same thing for 10 hours. It's not going to help you by doing it for another hour. If you have you have to think about the solutions and then apply them. So that's where I think in the end it amounts to, is just trying to, if you have an issue, then try to understand why you have an issue, and see if other people have the same issue, and if someone has managed to get around it, and maybe they made a guide, so you don't actually have to discover everything by yourself. You just have to apply it. So that's
true.
Yeah.
So I think the skill gap issue is maybe that skill gap isn't as thick of a slice of pie as we think it is. You know what I mean? Like, it's kind of like crappy mid-level players potentially using macros to beat other not so great mid-level players. I doubt these are high end. You know what I'm saying? Again,
I think that's probably more realistic of the situation, and I was a little more fearful of it first as I saw that. I think you're right. I think we pretty much talked about everything here. We definitely got to have Destracier back on another episode in the future here.
Oh, yeah.
What do you want to promote here? Give your shout out to your socials, Destracier, before we wrap up.
No. I'm just come to the competitive Squadrons Reddit, and just enjoy or share your knowledge, and also don't hesitate to share your thoughts on everything. In the long term, since basically the devs have more or less given up on the game already, I've been meaning to make something like some sort of a general poll so that we can see what everyone thinks about the different issues of balance in the game, so that in the end maybe they could patch some of the stuff, and we could try to organize the rules of the future competitions to better match the intent of no longer the devs, but actually of the people still playing the game. So
hopefully that we can definitely move towards something like that.
The passing of the torch. Interesting.
Greenfox, anything to end off here with?
No, thanks for coming by and talking to us, Des. Always a pleasure. Always a wealth of knowledge and a fountain of information coming out of you. And thanks for coming by.
Yeah, and thank you everyone for checking out this episode. Give it a like on here, subscribe to the channel, give it a review on iTunes. 5 is the number of stars, and say thank you, Destracier, for giving us all this information. And again, I'm going to say it myself. Thank you, Destracier, for all this information and being on the podcast. We will check everyone else next time on the Star Wars Squadrons podcast. Check you later.
517 scanner control. 517 scanner control.